How do people feel about Tsai Ing-wen now stepping down and handing over the reins?
I think everybody agrees that she will leave a legacy and a Taiwan model, how Taiwan can work with the other countries.
Now, before she came into power, she was making, noises and overtures into reforming the apparatus that is Taiwan's defense. How did she do on that?
Well, here's where I do have to be a bit more critical. What I did not see a great deal of, especially in the last few years, is serious change and movement in terms of actually making some of the more painful and politically costly changes necessary to truly improve defense.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. Now, in 2016, Tsai Ing-wen became Taiwan's first female head of state. Her platform of reinforcing Taiwan's international position outside of the China context, extensive domestic reforms, as well as bridging social and historical gaps, has won not one, but two landslide victories. And now, after 8 years in power, she is able to step down and hand over the reins to her former vice president, Ching-te, a situation unprecedented in Taiwan politics. Now, we'll be taking a look back at Tsai's 2 terms in power, her triumphs and her retreats, the promises she kept, as well as those left to her successor. And lending us their expertise, we have Kristy Hsu, the director of the Chung-Hua Institution for Economic Research in Taipei, and from Virginia in the United States, we welcome Michael Hunzeker, who is an associate professor at the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. Thank you both so much for being part of the program. I'm going to start with you, Kristy, and ask you, how do people feel about Tsai Ing-wen now stepping down and handing over the reins?
I think Tsai is going to leave office on May 20th, and there are a lot of different comments on her performance. However, I think everybody agrees that she will leave a legacy and a Taiwan model, how Taiwan can work with the other countries. There is a very interesting survey released last week, which asked Taiwanese people to rank Tsai's performance in 5 areas. And it's very interesting to find that Tsai's performance in foreign policy and also protection of Taiwan sovereignty are the highest ranked. However, there are issues, for example, domestic economic issues and also cross-strait issues that people are least satisfied with.
That's a great summary to start the discussion there, Kristy, and we are going to delve into those points a little bit further in the program. Now, Michael, internationally, how do particularly the rest of the world feel about Tsai stepping down and handing it over to her vice president? Do they see this as just a continuity, or is there a sense that there will be something lost or something very different as Taiwan goes forward with its next leader?
Great question. I think in many circles in Washington, that's exactly what a lot of people are wondering. There is, I would say, a strong hope that there's going to be more continuity than difference between the Tsai administration and the Lai administration. But I would be lying if I didn't say there wasn't some concern, at least in some circles in Washington, that perhaps Lai will not continue on that fine path that President Tsai has navigated over the last 8 years, and that could potentially create troubles.
So, Kristy, in terms of foreign policy in Asia, what would you say has been Tsai's biggest achievement, or what she's managed to make the most headway in?
Yeah, I think under Tsai's administration, she has already made the so-called New Southbound policy a brand for her work in the past 8 years. The New Southbound policy covers 18 countries, including South Asian countries, as well as New Zealand and Australia. And Tsai's economic and soft diplomacy in this region has achieved greatly in terms of enhancing economic partnership, as well as we see more students, for example, and also tourists coming from this region, as well as increasing people-to-people exchange. In the past years, we see relocation of supply chain away from China. into Southeast Asian countries, focusing in Vietnam, focusing in Malaysia and Thailand, etc. And Taiwan has played a very important role by investing in this country to establish a supply chain there, including automobile, electronics, as well as newly focused our semiconductor supply chain.
And Michael, what about the U.S., arguably Taiwan's biggest and most powerful ally? What has she done during her tenure with regards to relations with the U.S. and how is she viewed?
I mean, there's no question that U.S.-Taiwan relations have improved, and I would say improved dramatically over the course of her tenure. I'd say that's one of her capstone achievements. To be sure, I think a lot of this had to do with the deterioration of U.S.-China relations, but we should still give credit where credit is due in terms of President Tsai and her ability to position Taiwan, I think, in a very advantageous way. She did an excellent job of assuaging concerns that Taiwan might continue to drift into Beijing's orbit, most notably by refusing to acknowledge the 1992 consensus. She also, at the same time, speaking of this difficult balancing act, did a very good job of reassuring Washington that she wasn't going to rock the boat by doing anything brash or provocative.
So that brings me to defense, Michael. Now, you mentioned the 1992 consensus, which is the vaguely worded agreement which says Taiwan is part of one China. And with her refusal to acknowledge that, tensions with Beijing ratcheted up, particularly after she became president in 2016. China has threatened to take Taiwan by force if necessary, and over the past 8 years, we have seen an increase in aggression in the form of military exercises and rhetoric from China. TaiwanPlus reporter Jaime Ocon takes a look at Tsai's national defense record during these two terms.
When Tsai Ing-wen became Taiwan's president in 2016, one of the first things she addressed was the looming threat to security in the Asia-Pacific. Tsai took office at a time when China, which has long threatened to invade Taiwan, was increasingly capable of taking over the country. The possibility of war had loomed over Taiwan for decades, but many people didn't take it seriously, thinking Beijing would never invade. Tsai's first challenge was demonstrating that times were changing and the threat was real. To modernize Taiwan's military, Tsai increased defense spending faster than any previous president. In her 8 years in office, Taiwan's total defense budget almost doubled. But even with more money going into Taiwan's defense, Tsai faced a big problem in revamping the country's strategy. In 2017, then Chief of the General Staff, Admiral Li Ximing, introduced the overall defense concept. It was an innovative, modern approach to warfare, focused on an asymmetric strategy. It prioritized smaller, more mobile weapons like missiles, drones, and mines over big, expensive hardware like tanks and fighter jets. Military officials didn't like that.
Those entrenched interests are really about preserving the service's equities, largely about wanting the next and greatest large platforms, whether that's fighter jets, tanks, or capital ships. I think Tsai did hit resistance when she tried to move to what we in the United States would term an asymmetric approach to defense.
With little support, the overall defense concept ended up just that, a concept that was never really put into action. Many in Washington say this was one of Tsai's biggest security failures. For decades, the U.S. has been Taiwan's largest provider of weapons. But seeing how dependent Taipei was on Washington, Tsai also took steps to ease that reliance, injecting billions of dollars into the country's domestic defense industry.
Michael, you are a former Marine. You have military experience training in Taiwan. Would you say Tsai has done enough or effectively put it on the right path to be able to defend itself if China invades?
So I would say President Tsai has many signature achievements in her time in office, one of which is to really improve the appearance that Taiwan is taking its own defense seriously. Where I guess I would be much more critical is the degree to which she has actually meaningfully prepared Taiwan to defend itself. And here I think there's a lot of room left to be desired.
Right, and giving that perception, one of the elements of that, Kristy, is the one-year conscription, which Tsai brought back during her tenure. How has that been viewed, and has that given Taiwan a bit more confidence, in a sense, saying that, okay, we are taking matters into our own hands?
I think the general conception here is yes, especially young people regard Tsai's protection of Taiwan sovereignty, as well as the willingness to gather support from U.S. and other like-minded countries to safeguard and to protect Taiwan. I think right now it's the current belief that we are now with the support of all these countries, we feel much more confident. Having said that, I think defense is one thing, and also on the other thing, the Taiwan industry has tried to deliberately reduce their dependence on China, which make Taiwan less vulnerable. I think that's another achievement that we have to recognize.
Right, and going back to defense, Michael, one of your areas of research was Taiwanese defense reform. Now, before she came into power, she was making, I guess, noises and overtures into reforming the apparatus that is Taiwan's defense. How did she do on that?
Well, here's where I do have to be a bit more critical. Again, I think she did a great job of projecting the appearance that she and her administration is taking defense seriously. What I did not see a great deal of, especially in the last few years, is serious change and movement in terms of actually making some of the more painful and politically costly changes necessary to truly improve defense. I think the most poignant example is the fact that Washington has, for some number of years, been pushing on the Tsai administration to embrace what we refer to as a genuinely asymmetric defense posture. And President Tsai, in fact, had a senior officer in the form of Admiral Lee, who was prepared to do just such a thing. And instead, President Tsai's own Ministry of National Defense closed ranks and rejected those changes. And we really have not seen significant movement in that direction since that time.
So, Kristy, we know that the U.S. has an obligation to Taiwan to help defend itself. But do you think that Tsai has engaged other Asian countries in the event that there is some conflict to support Taiwan enough?
On one hand, Taiwan or Tsai administration tried to assure its neighbors that we are not the one trying to provoke tension or crisis across the Taiwan Strait, but on the other hand, trying to seek more support. But whether that will generate it into further action, we don't see much progress in that regard, except for Japan has declared it's going to do something, but so far we have not seen official declaration from the other countries in this region.
Michael, one of the biggest and possibly a very significant event for Taiwan was Russia's war on Ukraine, which Taiwan watched very, very closely, and this happened during Tsai Ing-wen's presidency, of course. What would you say was the biggest takeaway from Taiwan for that, defense-wise? And has Tsai been able to lay the groundwork based on the lessons learned from that?
So I guess here in the United States, there was a very striking sense that the war in Ukraine, or the renewed war in Ukraine, was going to serve as a powerful wake-up call, not just for the Taiwanese people, but in particular for the Ministry of National Defense, to show, first of all, that many of the methods that the United States was pushing Taiwan to adopt actually could, in fact, slow the ability of an invader to successfully occupy a nation, but also to just galvanize popular support for some of the more painful and difficult reforms that were necessary to realize these changes. For a short time, it seemed like hope was on the horizon. But again, a few years on now, it looks like a lot of that impetus and that momentum have been lost. And it feels like we are still very much in the same place that we were even before that war broke out.
Now, one of the biggest, I guess, supports for Taiwan, in a sense, if there is a conflict or an invasion, would be its relations with other countries. And I think that this is where also the southbound policy comes in, Kristy. That's been a cornerstone of Tsai Ing-wen's foreign policy. But my question to you is, has Tsai Ing-wen or this administration done enough to deepen relations with South Asia, Southeast Asia, given the kind of money we've seen China sink into it and the real push for ties with those governments?
I think the answer is yes or no. Yes means Taiwan has really explored de facto partnership with all these countries, especially with some countries, including India and also Vietnam. They have all from time to time expressed their support to enhancing or forging stronger economic partnership, especially for the case of India. But on the other hand, because all these countries have their one China principle in their country, and therefore Taiwan, though in the past 8 years tried to forge government-to-government relation, which still see a lot of difficulties. Now, however, the good news is right now a number of countries are really examining their one China principle so that they will have more flexibility to further engage Taiwan in matters that are really important to them.
Now, Taiwan's always upholded its values or relations with countries with similar values as being a big part of its strategy, and strengthening democracy as well as protecting and expanding freedoms featured extensively in Tsai Ing-wen's speeches and political messages. Madhav Des Nalapat is the vice chair of India's Manipal Advanced Research Group, and he gave us his perspective on Tsai's position as an icon of democracy.
In the Sainik world, President Tsai is the icon of democracy. And I don't think the Sainik world ever had an icon of democracy. You had Dr. Sun Yat-sen, but you could not say Sun Yat-sen doctrine was democratic. I mean, you had Lee Kuan Yew, but you can't say Lee Kuan Yew was a liberal Democrat, if you put it this way. And she has shown that democracy works even for the Sainik people. When I say Sainik, I don't want to use the word Chinese because that's used in a sense of a country. So I'm using the word Sainik for ethnicity. She has shown that the Sainik ethnicity also, democracy works best for them. No, not authoritarianism, not dictatorship, but democracy. She has not shown this with a megaphone or trumpeting. She has simply shown it by what she does, what she believes in, and what Taiwan has become.
Michael, cross-strait relations have deteriorated enormously under Tsai Ing-wen's administration. She is seen as a separatist, quote unquote, by the CCP. The opposition KMT says under her tenure, Taiwan has become the most dangerous place on earth. Would you say this is how she's viewed internationally?
I guess I would disagree with that characterization. I think cross-strait relations, certainly from the moment that she refused to acknowledge the 1992 consensus, were going to go into a negative direction. But I think there are far larger forces at play, to include the deterioration of the U.S.-China relationship that really pushed cross-strait relations to take the tenor and the trajectory that they have. From that perspective, I think then President Tsai has done a very good job of playing the relatively bad hand that Taiwan has been dealt in order to navigate these very troubled times and the very troubled waters.
And bringing it down to, we talk about her being an icon, and one of the things she actually did was she was the first president to apologize to indigenous people for past injustices. She also initiated reckoning with Taiwan's authoritarian past. Do you feel that this was put into action? Her apologetic stance or the initiatives that she hoped to bring to the table, or was this more lip service?
When she took office in her first term, she tried to address a number of domestic justice issues. That includes the Aboriginal issue we just mentioned. Right now in Taiwan, we have 16 tribes. I mean, 10 years ago, it's like 10 tribes. Right now, we have 16 tribes. So each tribe, they have different mindset and different concern, different issue. And therefore, the government has to take more time in addressing this issue. And regarding other domestic issue, including transition justice issue, I think that most of these have been covered or addressed by Tsai Ing-wen administration in the past 8 years.
I want to drill down a bit further into those domestic issues, and let's go to this soundbite here. Now, many people may remember Tsai Ing-wen's tenure in power for the major policies and decisions, but a successful presidency should arguably be measured by day-to-day governance and navigating the country through unexpected turbulences. For an assessment of that aspect of Tsai Ing-wen's 2 terms, we turn to David Fell. He's the director of the Center of Taiwan Studies at London School of Oriental and African Studies.
If we think about Tsai's 2nd term, then perhaps there have been less kind of groundbreaking social reforms. But I think the ability to navigate Taiwan through COVID, I think will also be remembered. Handling cross-strait relations, I think, has been a challenge. And I think that's an area where she received a fair amount of criticism in the 2024 election. But I think even here, I think her position has been quite close to that of public opinion. I think that if we look at the Democratic Progressive Party's presidency, I think they've really tried hard to engage with public opinion, engage with civil society, and even engaging with business. So it's been a really interesting kind of balancing act.
Kristy, where do you think the Tsai administration fell short on domestic policy, the day-to-day governance of Taiwan? Were there any missed opportunities there?
Well, I think one issue or one challenge that have been very frequently raised is about this energy policy or energy principles adopted by the DPP. And I think that was one of the challenges that Taiwanese industry have to face over the past years. And it's also said to be one of the factors that drove a lot of Taiwanese companies going abroad, going overseas, because they do not access to stable electricity supply, not to mention this green electricity. Another issue is about this stagnation of salary, especially for young people. I understand that young people in Taiwan always feel that they are disadvantages or they have no hope for the future. And therefore, Tsai tried to address the wage increase in the past years, however, not enough to have young people here feel satisfied. Another issue is Taiwan still facing a very difficult population issue. For example, starting from 2 years ago, our population actually declined because very low birth rate, and also because of this aging population. And Tsai has not been able to address that issue because there has been a lot of resistance here in introducing more foreign workers, for example.
Kristy, you brought up some very relevant points there, but I'm going to zoom into the whole issue of energy. Taiwan imports most of its energy. In fact, it imports a lot of things. Michael, how prepared do you think Taiwan is for a blockade scenario, which has been touted as the most likely scenario if China were to pressure Taiwan?
I mean, simply put, it's not prepared enough. There are a lot of steps and measures that need to be taken that I think experts have been identifying for a very long time. And this goes back to my point that I think we have seen more lip service to the fact that Taiwan is prepared to defend itself than we have seen actual movement. There are a lot of things the Nixon administration needs to do in terms of a blockade or a quarantine scenario. Certainly stockpiling energy, that's important. Stockpiling food, that's necessary. I think a big piece of this is psychological. And this gets, I think, to some of the Tsai administration's reluctance to perhaps suggest to the Taiwanese people that if they're serious about defending their own sovereignty, this will mean needing to take some drastic steps, making sure that each family has enough food supply, water supply, medical supply to take care of themselves, because in the event of a quarantine or blockade, the government may be quickly overwhelmed and unable to do so for some length of time.
Right. I want to pivot away from governance here and take a more personal look at President Tsai Ing-wen. Vanessa Hope is the producer and director of the recently released documentary Invisible Nation, which follows Tsai through her presidency. Take a listen.
Yeah, I feel her leadership style is is very wise, very sophisticated, very calm, very modest, and yet she could get a lot done. She wasn't showy. She wasn't a diva. She has a great sense of humor, and we filmed in her home for the first time when her cats were present and her dogs were outside, but inside she had her cats, and it was literally the first time we were filming with her and having this intimate interview where she was going to tell us more about herself. And her cats kept interrupting from the staircase, from the side, and her sense of frustration is very loose and light, and she's not a controlling person. So she went with the humor of it and made light of it.
We're just about running out of time here, but a rapid fire question here. Michael, from an international perspective, what's the legacy that Tsai leaves behind, and what do you think she'll be remembered for the most?
Well, I think history is going to be the judge of that, certainly from the perspective of where we stand right now. I think she will be remembered in particular for strengthening ties between the United States and Taiwan to Taiwan's advantage.
And Kristy, what about in Taiwan? What do you think she'll be remembered for the most?
I think among all these elected, President Tsai is the one that, though not very much welcomed by China, but still she did not cross the red line, and therefore she's trusted by the US and also other Western democracy, as well as by neighbors. And China also believe that she will not cross the red line. And she's the one that built the brand of Taiwan right now in international society. Therefore, everyone right now knows about Taiwan, about Taiwan's democracy, about Taiwan's fight to protect its own sovereignty, and also about Taiwan's economic resilience and the semiconductor. I think all this actually Tsai has played a very important role in promoting Taiwan with its own brand and also its own position in international arena.
We've just about run out of time here, but I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, but we've come to the end of the show. Thank you both so much for your time. Kristy Hsu with the Chung-Hua Institution for Economic Research and Michael A. Hunzeker with the Schar School of Policy and Government. Thank you both for your time and your insights. And for our viewers everywhere, it's been good to have your company. A reminder, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.